Today's guest is Bart Nollenberger. Bart is a successful motivational speaker, a sales trainer, and an executive coach. He has struggled through addictions to drugs and alcohol and has also dealt with some sexual integrity issues. Bart comes to us today in victory over these problems and has helped many others with these same challenges through a Christian organization called Celebrate Recovery. Bart is the author of a book that just got published called Keep the Change, and we had some wonderful discussions that span the gamut to show how one can go from the depths of despair to an inspiration for many. Let's listen in now. Hey Bart, I am so excited to have you. I'm just finding out that you released a book yesterday called Keep the Change. So we're going to talk about that, but welcome to the show.
Thank you, Roseanne. This is so fun.
I know it is. You have a great story to tell. But before that, I just wanted to have the viewers and listeners to get an idea of who you are and what you're doing today. So let's just start with that.
Well, I'm going to start. I always believe, especially having been in the dark in the pit, that we need to talk about victory, right? Mm-hmm. We always talk about our stories. If you've ever been to any kind of a recovery meeting, man, you want to slit your wrist by the time you leave, right?
Because I haven't been actually, but that doesn't sound fun.
Well, it's dark. And well, there's some great meetings and certain bad meetings, but it usually starts with what happened and then where we are. And so I'm going to say where I am today. I've got married to the woman of my dreams. We've been married 8 years as of March, and we have May, actually. I don't even know my wedding date. May 23rd. We were married 8 years. We have, between the two of us, 10 kids. We're blended, and we have 12 grandkids between the two of us. So that's pretty cool stuff. So
congratulations.
That's the victory. Yeah. Today, by the grace of God, I've got 38 years without drugs or alcohol. 38 years of sobriety. Today, by the grace of God, I'm free from sexual integrity issues and narcissism and working on anger and working on patience. But today, by the grace of God, I've got a business where I get to go and teach leaders how to be better at home and in the workplace. I get to work with leaders and companies, multi-million-dollar companies, on how to be better goal setters, how to be better men, better women. And today I am a life coach, a leadership coach, and a mental health coach. So,
and an author. You have to remember that one when you introduce yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
That's kind of a big deal. Yeah.
It is really cool. And you have a book, right?
I do.
Yeah,
the plans he has for me. So it's fun. Yes. It's really an achievement, to document.
Well, it's funny because I always liked Tony Robbins growing up. And I always thought, when I heard Tony, I said, that's it. I'm going to be another Tony Robbins. And that wasn't in the cards. I never thought if I wrote a book, it would be my recovery story. I thought it would be about winning a gold medal. Well, I never won a gold medal. I wasn't even close.
Or maybe the drugs and alcohol got in the way.
Maybe. But the reality was that was the lot in life. And the story that I get to tell, and I've told in my book, and my book is called Keep the Change. It's using the 12 steps to become a better leader in every area of your life. The 12 steps, of course, are the steps of recovery. But this was a story that had to be told, because in 2015, Mary and I had just gotten married. We went on our honeymoon. And, I've always been the kind of person that I wanted success. I loved public speaking. I wanted to be in front of lots and lots of people. And frankly, it was because I was so darn narcissistic. I wanted attention. That was really what it was. So I'm at the Caleb Fayette Awards, and I meet this guy named Stephen Copeland. Stephen has written a number of books, and I sat down with him and we had breakfast. Young guy, hair down to his shoulders, cool dude. And I said, I've been thinking about a book. And I really wasn't, but I just said that. And he said, what would it be about? And I said, well, I've got 30 years of sobriety. At that time, I had 30 years of sobriety. And he said, tell me more. We talked for like 3 hours.
Wow.
And when he was done, he said, dude, you got a book. And I said, yeah, that's funny. And he said, yes, I'll help you. I'll collaborate with you.
Wow.
And I said, okay, cool. I didn't do anything with it. Like every other thing in my life, I had the big P going on, procrastination. And I ended up procrastinating for about 5 years. And one day I called Stephen and I said, Stephen, let's roll, brother. And we got together, him being an expert writer, me knowing all the content, already had it in my head, already had it written down, already had it in audio. And he took the content and he deciphered it. I looked at it and I said, that's not right. He said, let me try it again. And after hours and hours and hours, as you know, it's a project of love. After hours and years, it came to fruition. And I love, and Stephen is not a ghostwriter in the book. He doesn't claim to be. He was a collaborator, but I couldn't have done it without him. And I love what he did with the side by side with me on this journey. I want to write 10 books in the next 5 years, and I'm going to have Stephen help me with every one of them.
Once you start one, you're supposed to write more. That's what people tell me.
Yeah. I got another one. I know exactly what the title is going to be. I've got it ready as soon as we get this launched.
Good.
So
I want to go back in your story, because I think it's really important. I'm glad that we start with success, because you are a truly successful person with living with joy.
Yeah.
So we need to, the people listening to this really want to understand what's possible when I, say goodbye to something toxic in my life. Yeah. So I want to just start with how we get caught. Like, where was it that you first started, whatever came first, the drinking, the drugging, the sexual intention, how did this all come to be a problem?
It's so funny. So many times you and I have heard stories of people that got parents that left the house or beat them, or, they went into foster homes, or they lived in a closet. I mean, we all hear every day about such ridiculous stories. Horrible. Or stories of getting cancer at a young age, all of that. None of that was me. Mine was 2 white middle American adults. My dad was, and the reason I bring up the color is because I had favor. I mean, there's people that grow up in the ghetto, they don't have favor. I had favor. And I'm not going to say why, but I didn't know how to handle it. My dad was a car dealer. My mom was a model. And my dad was a drunk, and my mom was a codependent. My mom put perfume on the pig. I talk about that in the book, make everything look great. Joan Crawford did a movie years ago, or they did a story of Joan Crawford, the actress, on how everything had to be perfect. No metal hangers. Everything was in its place. That was my mama. Everything was in its place. And I don't know what happened, except that I saw my dad drinking. I saw the dysfunction of it. And I never believed I was enough. I had an older brother that was better looking, better athlete, had more friends. And somehow something happened where I just thought I wanted to be somebody else. I didn't like the way I looked. I had a big old nose. I had buck teeth. I had an ear that stuck way out. I was picked on a lot, I guess. And I was a lousy athlete, even though I love sports. So the thinking that was going on in my mind was the worst thing that happened, right? Mm-hmm. And nobody ever told me, Bart, you're going to be a champion. Never. So I one day saw my dad drinking and saw him having fun. So I decided one day when they weren't around, I'd start tapping into the liquor bottle.
How old were you?
13. Me
too. You and I, that matches up with my story too.
Yeah.
I had a great life. I started drinking at 13. Yeah.
And I wanted to be like my dad. I think that was really it. And you know what? My dad never gave me any attention. So now this was a way to get attention. Hey, Pops, look at me. And, of course, it was negative attention. But get this. I started drinking. The first time I drank, I took a big goblet, kind of like this. and I poured it full of whiskey. And then I took another goblet, kind of like this, and I poured it full of vodka. And I stuck it in the front yard. And then that night, I walked downtown to a social club for kids in Perrysburg, Ohio, where I lived. And before I walked down there, though, I guzzled the whiskey and I guzzled the vodka. And I walked down this 1.5 miles to the Beehive, it was called. And by the time I got there, everything changed. All of a sudden, people were laughing at me, with me. I thought they were laughing with me. They thought I was cute. All the girls, I thought I was getting their attention. I was an absolute fool. That night, a buddy of mine drove me home. I stumbled in the house. My parents were sitting on my bed and they laughed. That was it. Now I knew how to get attention. Because, Roseanne, I had attention deficit disorder. But it wasn't just focus. It was, I wanted attention. Right. And if you could give me attention, then, whether it was a girl or my parents or whatever, I was going to do anything possible to keep that attention going. And alcohol allowed me to get attention. It started off cute and ended up being a nightmare. I wrecked 6 cars in high school.
Wow.
But every time I wrecked a car, my mom would say, don't tell your grandparents and go to the dealership and get another car. They never, ever held me accountable. They didn't teach me how to be an adult. Do I blame them? Of course not. Of course not. Wow. But that's the worst thing that happened. But that is what happened. So I had this emotionally limited experience of how life really is. Spoiled, young, rich kid. And it's incredible that when I was 28, 150 pounds, five grand a month cocaine habit, used every other drug on the market except for heroin. And I went into rehab. It's incredible that I got sober, but I just hated my addiction. 10 years later, Jesus pulled me out of a pit. And frankly, there's no reason for that to have happened. I didn't know Jesus. My parents were Unitarians. I don't even know what that is. As a kid, I would go to church and sleep. I had no idea what any of that was. But I had grandparents that were Lutherans, and I believe in that. I'm believing that they prayed for me every day. Mm-hmm. And I believe that in heaven they prayed for me, and this happened. So I just happened to walk into this church 10 years later, and my world changed instantly.
Now, wait, I have a few questions about where you were, because you said you got clean.
Yep.
10 years earlier.
Yep.
But so you stayed clean, or you went back into a pit? Because what you said, I was in a pit. What caused you to go into that pit?
Well, Jesus pulled me out of a pit. And what happened was I was clean and sober from drugs and alcohol, but I flipped addictions. And I flipped addictions to sexual integrity issues. I flipped addictions to my anger. Because you know what? Sexual integrity issues can really kill your self-esteem. It is just ugly, and it's insidious, and there's nothing good about it, right? And I was caught up in porn. I was caught up in affairs. I was caught up in just being a terrible human. And that caused anger. So even though I didn't drink and I didn't use drugs, none of that happened, but I did continue and ramped up some other addictions.
So I want to ask you a few questions about that, because the way I see it, the drug, well, I assume drugs, any substance, but I think sexual integrity is just, you go to the same pit. The pit's not different, is it? It's something that you are doing that you recognize is wrong, that you recognize is unhealthy for you, but you cannot stop it. Is that the same for all three of them?
You know what? I don't think it is the same.
Okay.
I think a pit, there's a pit of drugs, alcohol, and then there was the pit of being caught up in my sexual integrity issues. So they were different things. So I was clean and sober, man. I didn't drink. I didn't do cocaine. I mean, I had done, as I said earlier, cocaine to 2 and $5 grand a month. So I was caught up into that and still doing sexual integrity misdemeanors. But once I ended up getting clean and sober, it was like Oh, I went to AA meetings. I had a sponsor. I prayed on my knees every day for that drugs and alcohol piece, but I didn't do anything about the other sexual integrity piece. I continued to be that person that was not morally stable. I was a liar, I was a cheat, I was a stealer, right? But I didn't drink. But I knew the principles to stay sober. And when I walked into that church, I realized, and here's what I heard. Here's what happened. I don't know if I even told you this.
No,
how I learned about Jesus was I was driving down the street in Santa Cruz, California. And I looked at a church that I drove by, Roseanne, probably 100 times.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a Sunday, and I thought, they have nice cars in the driveway. And I was a car person. So I pulled in the lot, and I walked in the church, and they were playing rock and roll. And I thought, well, this is cool. And then this pastor came up, and he had jeans on and a nice shirt, but he didn't use these and thous. He was talking like you and I are talking right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, this is different. And what he said was this. He said, don't be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, I stopped doing this, but I didn't stop this because the thinking didn't change. So when you said, isn't it the same pit? Technically it was. I was doing the same stuff over and over again. It was just different stuff. And that started Celebrate Recovery for me. That started a sponsor and with my sexual integrity issues. That started to be a complete behavior shift and awareness. That was a 12-step program for me that worked based on Jesus's principles. And my program was sex addiction. That's what I was working on then.
I think the thing that you and I talked about when we first met, we met at a church fair of some sort. Yeah. And we were talking about the addictions, and you said, look, it's the dopamine hit. And that's kind of why I really focus on the scientific aspect of it. Mm-hmm. And, the trigger, the dopamine trigger, the need for it, the physical desire to be satisfied like immediately as opposed to warding off temptation. So, obviously sexual integrity issues is not my issue, but I do believe that in many respects there are, like you said, it's a renewing of the mind. For sure. So the moment you realized that, you realized you had a problem. And that's what a lot of people say. Well, people have a drinking problem. They just don't realize it. I'm like, yeah, I think they do. I think they just don't want to admit it.
Amen. Yep.
Yeah. I think we know when we have problems, we know when something's negatively affecting us. It's just super hard to discuss, but you felt called to do that day you went into the church, right?
Yeah. When 10 years earlier, I went into that 30-day rehab, I was called that, and I didn't even know. When I was 28, I went into rehab, and I didn't even know I had a drinking problem, but I knew I had a drug problem. And after 30 days, I was convinced that I had a problem. And I made the decision. I was so scared. I didn't want to be the same person I was before. I didn't want to be like my dad. I didn't want to be like my boss who was a cocaine addict. I hated that. I didn't want to be that. Mm-hmm. So I go back to what you said, Roseanne. I admitted that I was powerless over cocaine, powerless over alcohol, and my life was absolutely unmanageable. And in that admission, I got people around me that could lift me up, that I couldn't have any secrets. If I could call them, accountability partners, and say, dude, I'm struggling. And they would lift me up. I got a sponsor, somebody who I could trust, who I would tell him anything, and he would support me, but he would also hold me accountable. We established expectations, and he defined accountability for me. And if I didn't do it, he would call me on it. And there were sponsors that fired me because I didn't meet their expectations, even in that sobriety. But I finally got somebody that I was willing to listen to what he said, and I did everything he said, everything, because I was scared. And what's interesting about that, when that happened when I was 28, I didn't even know who God was, but I would still get on my knees every day and pray a couple prayers to a God I didn't even know.
Right.
But what's interesting about the journey was that I did everything I could not to drink and use. I followed the steps of recovery. If you're listening to this, it's 12 steps of AA. I followed those. I got a sponsor. I got accountability partners. I prayed. But I didn't do it for the sexual integrity issues. I never admitted that I was a sex addict. It took me freaking decades to admit it. But when I did, like you said, when I admitted, man, this is a problem. My life is absolutely a mess. Everything changed, because then I was willing to do anything to kick it in the teeth and to not do it anymore. But it took a long time, man. It was a hard one to break. It was really hard to break.
I think you touch on something that I really want to discuss with you about the accountability, because it's super funny. Of course, I have a daily devotional, and in that daily devotional, I give people access to a private Facebook group. And I'd say, I don't know, 1 in 10, 1 in 20 kind of comes in.
Yes,
and then even when they come in, they're afraid to really speak up, even though I'm like, hey, I'm here, just share, But when you are honest and open, the accountability part cannot be underestimated into how powerful it is, because we play with these things in our head, as you mentioned, and it can happen for decades. The NIH, that's the National Institutes of Health, says that, in substance abuse, people will try quitting for 4.5 years on their own before they get help. I think that's way underestimated. I think I was doing something for a decade trying to manage it, what I mean, to some extent. I'm sure, what does 4.5 years sound like to you? Like trying to manage it on your own. Like, I'll do this, I won't do that. I'll do it after 5. I won't, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, there was probably hundreds of times when with my sexual integrity stuff, that I wanted to stop, because it was so insidious. It was hard on my relationship. It was hard on my, it was being really unfaithful to my kids, because I was not the person they thought I was. Right.
And were you married at the time?
Yeah.
So did that cost you your marriage?
Oh yeah, 100%. Absolutely. Yep. And so and I was married 22 years, and it's the biggest. I'm so glad for where my life is today. It's amazing how God works, right? I would have never met my wife if that hadn't happened. And I adore my wife. And yet that was one of the biggest failures I believe I ever had, because that person was the mother of my kids. And anytime a family breaks up, and I'm sure my wife would tell you about her family, about her breakup with hers, that's awful. It's terrible. And yet, again, it's amazing how God works. What looks so dark can turn into light. And again, I wouldn't have this incredible relationship without that. But back to what you said, in my drugs and alcohol career, I can't tell you how many times I wanted to quit, but I didn't let anybody know. And I certainly didn't admit it. I remember I got sober at 28. And about a year before that, I saw this guy named Bobby McGee. Now, Bobby I wasn't his real name, but it sounds good. And Bobby, his first name was Bobby. But I saw him one day and I thought, dude, you look good. And see, as a narcissist that couldn't walk past a mirror without looking at it, I always looked at people's outsides, and Bobby looked good. So I said, Bobby, what's up, man? You look great. And if somebody didn't say I look great, I'd go look in the mirror and say, why? Do I have something in my teeth? I was so needing that affirmation. But Bob looked great. And I said, what happened? He said, I went into rehab. I said, what's rehab? Well, I knew what rehab was. but I was small talking him. And I said, what's rehab? He said, well, I went to the Adrian Center in Santa Cruz, California, and I haven't drank in 2 years. I said, get out, you. I mean, this guy was 10 times worse than me. So I said, no, cool. That sounds good. That's good. Good for you. Like I didn't need it. And he knew better. That's why he told me. Next day I called up that center and I talked to a lady named Reba, and she said, come see me. I went in and sat in front of her. At that point, broken, probably weighed 160 pounds maybe then, but I said, I need help, kind of. And I was cocky and narcissistic. And she said, well, then you need to go. We've got a 30-day program here. Be here 24/7. I said, I can't do that. I'm a big deal. I'm a finance manager at a car dealership. I make big money. I can't take 30 days off. She said, well, I can't help you. So I went to the car and cried because I was so desperate. And how many people listening to this, through whatever their story is, have cried because they want help. They don't want to do this anymore. And in their deep soul, they know they're broken. In their deep soul, all they have to do is admit it to somebody.
Right.
And again, whether you believe in the 12 steps or not, they've saved my life. I wrote a book based on that story.
They've saved lots of people's lives.
Exactly. Yeah. So whatever that means to you, whether it means by admitting you call Roseanne, whether admitting you go get your butt to a meeting, but in the admission, everything happens. But you said something earlier.
The accountability thing. Yeah.
Dude, listen, I've got people I sponsor that are broken and they want help, but they're flakier than you know what, man. It's like you said, not everybody goes on your site. Why is it that somebody wants help, but they can't do what they know they need to do to get to that place?
I think there's this process of I can fit, and tell me if you agree with this. I was a successful executive. You were very successful in life. And especially for people that, whether they're narcissistic or they're just used to doing it their own way, you have this egotistical view like, wait, I can fix problems. I'm a problem solver. So I am going to solve this problem. I am not going to have somebody else solve it. Right.
Right.
And I think that's going on. And I tell people, like, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting something different. When you're having conversations with yourself for years upon years, do you want to just continue that same process? Because you're not going to change anything, right?
It's actually comical, and it's so sad.
In hindsight, it's comical. Going through it, not so comical.
Right, but
people don't see it in themselves. They just don't see it.
Yeah. And here's the comical piece. We're being real here. The comical piece is you and I get it. The comical piece is you and I get what it takes to have freedom. The comical piece is you and I understand that, oh my gosh, if I had known then what I know now, I would have never done that.
Amen. That is why I am here talking to you.
Exactly.
If people only understood that life is so much better here, like
and
so
easier.
Much better.
Easier. We make it so much tougher, right?
Right.
But I think that what happens is, as I look at the people, I've got a couple of people I'm sponsoring that, man, they're just emotionally so immature, and I think that that's part of it. And yes, they think they can get through it. They think they can get through it on their own. Their thoughts are bouncing through this 3x5 block on their shoulders, and the same stuff keeps bouncing around, like you said. But what I think is that too, they so don't believe in themselves that they think they deserve that. Matthew Maltz wrote a book called Psycho-Cybernetics. And in that book, he talks about you and I can't exceed our own level of self-belief.
Oh, absolutely.
And what that means is, if I believe in I'm a 2, which I know from my 2 sponsees, they just can't get it right. They can't even call me every day. That's all I ask. Call me every day. And they continue to do stupid, right? And I love them, but I know what it takes. All you got to do is call me. I'll help you get to the other side, right? And yet their thinking goes back to what Chip said. And when I first heard him at church, their thinking skewed. And until you and I can change our self-esteem, we can't think different. So I think it's so important for us as sponsees or as leaders in the community to help people change their thinking, so they then say, you know what? I have been living on a river in Egypt called denial, right? I have been lying to myself. I get it. I'm a good person. God says he loves me over 300 times in the Bible, but I get it. When they get it, they're maybe more interested in getting help because they understand that if they can change their thinking, they can change their life, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess I do the same thing. We do the same thing. My approach is based on the title of my book in Jeremiah 29:11. And I basically say, you know what? God has such a better plan.
Yeah.
You gotta put it aside for a little bit to really see and understand there is something different. And you are right. What do you guys call it? Stinking thinking?
Yeah.
All of us are capable of being absolute downright bullies.
Yeah.
And what resonated with me, what you said is, or what you were quoting that other person,
Matthew Maltz.
Matthew Maltz, we're only capable of reaching our own thought limits. And so when you think you're worthless, you're not accomplishing much.
Yeah.
And now I think, I can do anything. And if I think I can do anything and I only achieve, I achieve short of that, then I've still achieved more than I used to.
Who cares, right?
It's the fun of going after it.
Yeah. Like I said, I wanted to be Tony Robbins. That's a joke. But what I've got is better.
Still time. There's still time.
Tony ain't got no 12 kids. He's got no 12 grandkids. I do. What I got is better. What I've been given is this incredible relationship with Christ. But I will tell you that when I'm working with people, I'm working with a guy right now who is more mature. He's 50 and he's got low self-esteem issues. So I said, man, you need to get the book by Craig Groeschel, Winning the War in Your Mind.
Oh, yeah. I've read
that. A great book?
Amazing. Yeah. That's kind of what I focus on, the science of the brain. Yeah.
Yes. So and me too. I mention a lot in my book. And he's refocusing his thinking. And, the meeting on Monday nights at Celebrate Recovery allows that to just, it's an addition to having a sponsor, is addition to having a recovery accountability partners, is addition to. So he's got this team, this collaboration team that helps him with his thinking. His thing is his low self-esteem, is thinking. He's not an addict per se, but he gets depressed easy. And so I'm working on his thinking so that he believes in himself and can achieve what he is destined to achieve, God's max capacity. But what I tell him is, dude, it's in the day. It's how you and I start our day that determines our day. And part of that is hanging out with God, writing down our values, 100%. Having that conversation with God. And also the questions we ask ourselves, not why am I so damn stupid? What did I do right today? Catch ourselves with right things. Mm-hmm. What did I learn today? And because learners are earners, right?
Yeah.
And what must I change? When we ask those questions, and then when we get into victim mode, well, that guy cut me off, or my boss is being mean. What's my role in that? So those 4 questions have changed his thinking. So now his way that he loves himself is higher. And because of that, he's got a great relationship going on now. Now, can he sabotage it in a heartbeat? Yes, it's a daily battle.
Yeah, we all can. Yeah, for sure. This is a good segue to, so you started with AA, and then it sounds like you went through Celebrate Recovery yourself. And I know you started a Celebrate Recovery ministry at Cornerstone in Chandler, Arizona. But tell me, because I'm sure I I like Celebrate Recovery only because it's Christian based. It's not higher power based. It's Jesus based.
Yeah.
It's different. Did you go through Celebrate Your Recovery first yourself before you
Yep.
started one?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So
Yep.
tell us about Celebrate Recovery, why somebody would go to it, what's cool about it. What was the big difference maker for you?
Well, I will say AA worked for me. It just didn't
Okay.
work for me with my sexual integrity issues, right?
Okay.
So could it have? I don't know. I never went to. I went to Sex Addicts Anonymous. Oh my God, I want to throw up. I went to Sex and Love Addicts, and that was just so. It was so humiliating to be in those rooms, and so I was trying to find that.
Can you give me a sense of why that would be humiliating?
Oh my gosh, I don't know that I can. It was hearing the stories of the people in the room.
Okay. So you
whatever
had
you
a
can picture that somebody was sexually off the chart, you would hear that in those rooms,
because
right?
you'd have to admit it. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I
So
think that's important to talk about where we're going. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
and it
So
didn't mean they were wrong. It just meant that in that room there was some real deviant behavior going on, and hearing that deviant behavior was hard to listen to, right? Because I think even then I wanted help, but I was in denial. Oh, I'm not that bad. And it was just so, and they didn't really have a God center. They certainly didn't have a Jesus center. So what happened with Celebrate Recovery, once I went to that church in Santa Cruz, I found out they had a Celebrate Recovery. And I thought, oh, now I can get some help. And so I started going to Celebrate Recovery. I got a sponsor for sexual addiction, and I started going to meetings. And I started doing the same thing. It was different than AA. In AA, you just go to a meeting, a bunch of guys are in there smoking cigarettes in the back of the room or outside, and they talked about God very lightly. In Celebrate Recovery, we came in, and the first thing we did was have worship. And we had worship just like church. And we just poured our heart with music that emotionally charged us. And then what would happen is they would have somebody come out and tell their story, and they would talk about their testimony. And they would talk about that for about 20 minutes. And in the testimonies, I heard stories that were just like me every time, broken this to this place of victory. And I heard them and I thought, well, maybe there's hope here. And then after that, Roseanne, we would break out into small groups of gender specific and subject specific. So I'd be in a room of 20 guys that had sexual integrity issues, but it was Christ centered. And being Christ-centered, there is that we are still loved no matter how ugly it was. If somebody said they did the worst of the worst, Christ was surrounded in the room, if that makes any sense.
You kidding me? I mean, this is the beauty. This is the beauty of Jesus, right?
Yes. And it wasn't some dark alley where a guy's talking about his deviant sexual stuff that I couldn't relate to, but I didn't have anybody to turn to. I needed a Jesus then to say, God, what am I supposed to do with this? What am I supposed to learn from this? When I went to Celebrate Recovery, I got it, and Jesus was the center of it.
So in Celebrate Recovery, and I just really want to be clear because I want to know people have options. It's not that the sexually deviant behavior doesn't exist there. But you're not talking about it in the same fashion, right? What's going on that's different there?
Well, I think here's the deal. It's a safe place. It's an absolutely safe place. So yes, the same stories come out, but it's a safe place. You're just with people in that room that have sexual integrity issues.
Okay.
And they know it's a safe place where they can talk, right?
Okay.
So, and it's Christ-based, it's Christ-centered. So we all know whose we are.
There's not as much discomfort. There's understanding of the forgiveness aspect.
Yes.
I think the reason for sharing is the relief to know that you are not alone.
You're not alone. Yeah.
It's, and here's the thing. This has been like I guess for the past couple of months, this has been really big on my heart, that each of us was built uniquely in the eyes of God. Like there's no other person in the universe that's as unique as us. But when sin is involved, it all looks the same. There is no uniqueness to sin,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
There's something too. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there's something too, because I've been to a couple of other groups there was one group at Cornerstone that nobody even knew existed. It was Monday night, and I found it when I moved to Arizona. But it was a group of men that were dealing with sexual integrity issues. And it was again that safe place in the church. It wasn't a Celebrate Recovery, but it was a sexual integrity group.
Okay.
And again, there was one guy was a pitcher for the California Angels. Another one played for the Arizona Cardinals. Another one, three of them were pastors. So it was such a safe place, but it was covered in the blood of Jesus.
Right.
So we knew through that we were in a safe building, a safe place. And even though there was maybe, some was more deviant than others, again, it was a safe place. And because it was a safe place, and because it was surrounded in Jesus, that's where the healing started and evolved. And what I found was that's the thing about Celebrate Recovery. Yeah, we'll puke it out. Yeah, it's a safe place, but we're going to also do the work so we don't have to be that person anymore. And we're at the right hand of Jesus as we're in recovery.
Absolutely.
So just to give you up to speed, we do in Celebrate Recovery, it's a 12-step program. And every week we either have a testimony or somebody does one of the steps in a lesson. And we get together every week. Starts with worship in a big group, testimony or lesson. Then we break out into small groups, again, that are gender specific and issue specific. Okay. And then after that, we get together in fellowship. So it's a small church. And it's a commitment because it takes time, but also the people in the small groups, we encourage them to do a step study. And what a step study is that they go on another night, they work through the 12 steps. They deep dive into the 12 steps. And right now we're on the 4th step where we really do an inventory. The 4th step, if you don't know what it is, for those who are listening, we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. So with a partner that's a sponsor by our side, we deep dove into those resentments and behaviors and activities we did in the past, and we get them all out there on paper. So so we can admit it deeply. And that's where the healing comes. And this step study, Roseanne, is about 10 months. We take 10 months deep every week, going through all the different steps, including the 4th step. And then we go into a 5th step, which is we admit it to a God and to ourselves and to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. And that other person is a sponsor. And what happens is now our secrets are out. They aren't secrets anymore. Yeah. And we're only as sick as our secrets. There's a healthy piece in that. It's a lot of work, but it kept me sober from drugs and alcohol.
It's so hard for everybody because of the fear of being judged. And we know this is a very judgmental world we live in, which is why I think what people don't understand, well, Christians are guilty of this too. But the way we're supposed to behave is to be non-judgmental, right? We're not supposed to judge others because Jesus is the final judge. And the problem comes, church should be a safe place. Other Christians should be a safe place because we all know that we fall short. And sometimes it isn't. So that's, it's hard. It's hard. But you're right. People need safe places. I think they need community. And I agree that sharing with somebody that you're struggling, you will find freedom in that, like absolute freedom.
Yeah.
And so Bart, we are running out of time, but I want to see, if you have any final thoughts or encouraging words for anybody listening here, and then give you a chance to have people find out where you are too. So
you got it. One thing about it is, when I got into even writing the book, I didn't know that sexual integrity issues were going to be the thing that I probably needed to talk about. And I will tell you now, having freedom from that, being on the other side of that, has made me to be the man that I was born to be. And to have freedom of that and the lightness of that, and to know that isn't how I live anymore, is such a relief. I went through decades of the ugliness and the hidingness from other people. 70% of the men in the church have probably a porn addiction. And there's a lot of groups.
I've heard it's big. It's big.
And there's a lot of groups out there that I've been in where there's pastors in the room because they can't, it's a safe place for them, right? They can't go where people know them, but they can go online or Zoom on a national program. And Triple X Church out of Vegas has these programs that you can go to and talk to other people that you don't even know every week and just tell your secrets. Letting it out is when the freedom comes. But is it a sexy topic? No, it's an ugly topic. But as men, specifically, I'm a man, I know I can't be the person I need to be to my wife and my kids without freedom from this. And I'll do anything from my time on the planet to help my kids not have to deal with this, to help people I work with not have to deal with this. Yes, drugs, alcohol, I'll help them with that too. But I know the underlying piece that most people don't want to talk about is that sexual integrity stuff.
You're right.
We need to address it, take it on, put on the breastplate, the shield, the helmet, and go to war with it. I really believe that. And I am commissioned on this planet to help people get to that place. I really am. I really am.
And you are doing God's work. I love it. And I just thank you for all that you do, all the lives that you've been responsible for saving, all the people that you've inspired for Christ. Thank you. Thank you. It's just been, so how do people find you? How do people find the book? Yeah.
The book you can get on Keep the Change Book. That's what this is, .org. And that's where we're selling it right now. We'll eventually go to bookstores and Amazon, but we're taking a marketing program for the first 3 months just through our website, keepthechangebook.org. Also, my phone number's in that website. My phone number is in the book, and you can call me anytime. True story. Bob Goff did that. I figured if Bob Goff can do it, so can I. You can find me on Facebook at Bart Nollenberger. You can find me on Instagram at Bart Nollenberger. And you can call me at 480-327-8751. If you need to talk. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. Again, thanks, Bart, for being on with me. It's just such an honor.
Yeah. Well, you're so sweet. Thank you, Roseanne. We got this, man. We got a mission. We got to do this. Right?
We do.
All right. Thank you for what you're doing.
All right. Thanks.